Hi, this is Teddy, and you're listening to Andrea Mercado from the New Florida Majority on Two Broads Talking Politics, part of the Demcast Podcast Network. Stay home and save lives, and goodbye.
Hi everyone, this is Kelly with Two Broads Talking Politics, part of the Demcast family of podcasts, and I am on today with Andrea Mercado, who is the Executive Director of New Florida Majority. Am I saying your name close to right?
Yes, it's Andrea Mercado. Thank you.
Andrea. Okay, hello Andrea.
Hi, how are you?
Well, every day is kind of the same and yet totally different right now.
It's a loaded question these days, I know.
Yes. So I have all sorts of things I want to ask you about Florida, but let's start with just an overview of what is New Florida Majority and what is it that the organization works on?
New Florida Majority is building political power of marginalized communities in Florida. We really work to advance an inclusive and equitable and just democracy for all. So we're community organization and political powerhouse, and really, focused on what does it take for us to change the state into a state where all of us belong.
And so that seems like a project that requires a lot of work in a place like Florida. We've been hearing a lot over the past few years in Florida about things like voting rights and voter suppression. Can you talk about what pre-coronavirus, what some of the projects were that you were working on?
Yeah, well, I think, Florida is home and it's a place with so many contradictions. It's one of the largest states in the country. It's the largest battleground state where elections time and time again come down to these like razor thin margins. And it's also a place of deep inequality, the biggest income inequality gaps in the country. Miami is considered to be the most unequal city in the country, with some really heightened affordable housing crisis and a huge immigrant population, Caribbean immigrants and Black immigrants, in addition to immigrants from all over Latin America. And it's a state with 67 counties, 14 media markets. So a lot of diversity between Miami to Orlando to Jacksonville or Panama City. So in so many ways, it's like can be representative of the diversity of our nation. And I think, New Florida Majority is focused on really advancing racial equity. And Florida is a state with a long history of racial inequality. Florida had the highest lynchings per capita and was part of the Confederacy. And a lot of the racism and inequality is perpetuated by our laws. And so, we were honored to be a part of the fight for Amendment 4 and voter rights restoration, which ended the unjust exclusion of voters. If you had a felony conviction, you were essentially locked out of voting for the rest of your life. And thanks to the leadership of returning citizens like Desmond Meade and the Florida Rights Restoration Coalition, we were able to collect over 1 million petitions to put that on the ballot, and it won in 2018. And so, as an organization who really believes in democracy, we've been working to realize the promise of Amendment 4 and go out there and register record numbers of people. We've registered over 75,000 people to vote since the 2018 election. And, we work on issue areas too, defending our right to have an abortion or advancing immigrant rights, and changing the conditions for women who are incarcerated, the Dignity Campaign. So we take on a whole bunch of issues, but really at its core, we're about protecting and expanding democracy.
So Florida was one of the states that was scheduled to have the presidential primary on March 17th, which was sort of right after all of the coronavirus pandemic in the U.S. was really picking up. I live in Illinois, which is another one of the states that had a primary that day. And so there was a lot of sort of confusion, continues to be confusion moving forward, states that haven't had their primaries yet, about how best to handle it, what to do, how to make sure everyone had access. Can you talk a little bit about what the situation in Florida looked like and what sorts of problems there were, what you would have liked to have seen done?
Yeah, I mean, look, we were in full-on get out the vote. That's kind of core to what we do as an organization. And so we were out there making sure people knew there was an election, making sure people were motivated and mobilized to go vote when the coronavirus pandemic was escalating. And so we literally were canceling volunteer canvasses and from one day to the next, calling people off the doors and pivoted into phone banking and texting and really pushing the state to put people's safety first and foremost. We actually ended up suing the state together with organizations like the Advancement Project and Demos and Dream Defenders, really, saying that the state should expand vote by mail given the circumstances and should allow anyone who wants to request a vote by mail ballot to get one and to be able to make their voice heard and participate in democracy by voting by mail. And we lost that injunction, the emergency injunction that we were pushing for. But I think a lot of our concerns, we just found out, I think it was late last week, that 2 poll workers in Broward County actually tested positive for coronavirus. I think as the country is looking at really important elections, critical elections this year, I think we have to figure out how do we get every eligible voter a vote by mail ballot and give them an opportunity to participate in our democracy. I think protecting the elections in November and the elections leading up to November is critical.
It seems like in Florida, despite all of the problems and the confusion, that there was a pretty high voter turnout. Are you seeing energy, leading up to that and then, continuing that makes you hopeful about the direction that Florida is going, the way voting might happen in November?
Yeah, I think this is so important to emphasize is, we saw more people turn out to vote in 2020 than we saw in 2016 in this primary. And I think it's a good signal that there's a lot of energy around the election this year. And I think we have to be mindful that how we show up for people in times of crisis impacts whether they're willing to participate in our democracy. And we've seen that time and time again during our hurricane relief work. As an organization building independent political power, something that's central to our theory of change is that politics and democracy doesn't just happen on election day. It's a year-round project. And, just like as we're preparing for a hurricane, we need to show up in communities that oftentimes feel like politicians aren't speaking to them, and that politics, they're feeling so marginalized from the political conversations. We see that as part of our mandate to reach out to folks and to engage them and to do the education on why it's important to fill out the census and how that determines money for our hospitals and our schools, and why it's important to vote. And I think this year that's going to be as critical as ever is to make sure that we're checking in with folks and seeing how they're doing in this crisis. We had voter registration canvassers that can't be out there registering people to vote at laundromats and bus stops and schools, but are making phone calls every day. We've called over 15,000 people in the state just to ask them, how are you doing? What do you need? Do you have food? Have you lost your job? will you call Governor DeSantis and demand that he take stronger action to protect our communities? Will you register to vote by mail? And we launched a website, floridacoronaaction.org, as a place where people can access resources, but also raise our collective voices to demand that, both corporations and elected officials really step up and protect people in this time. And I think that is going to be critical when we're looking at turnout in the fall. The organizations that have built the trust and the infrastructure and momentum will prevail when it comes down to Election Day.
You mentioned the census and doing education around the census. Can you talk some about why that's important, why your organization is focusing on the census, and what does that education campaign look like now that you can't be out knocking on doors to talk to people and encourage them to complete the census?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of people out there that are skeptical of giving the government their information, and rightly so. I think those fears are based on folks' experience and history. And, we're out there doing the education, letting folks know either, by phone or online, that the census is determined on the resources that we get in our communities, and how people fill that out and whether people fill it out will determine funding and resources for the next 10 years. So it really couldn't be more important. And, I think we think that work isn't just, we have to do it online. We have to do it on the radio. I see so many organizations doing the work of doing it in multiple languages, but we also need to pick up the phone and call people, because the digital divide is real. There's over 30% of households in the state of Florida that don't have Wi-Fi at home. And, maybe they have a smartphone, but they don't have unlimited data. And I think we can't forget that, we need to just reach out and call folks and try to talk to them, and reach out to our families and our and friends, and make sure that they're filling out the census, and just check in with people as well, and see how people are doing. There's it's a really hard time for so many people, and people really appreciate just that phone call or that text to let them know that you're thinking about them.
So there's been a lot of focus over the past few weeks on states because of the lack of action by the federal government to address the pandemic. And, Florida, I think in particular, is one that I've been watching. So we're recording this on Thursday, April 2nd, and it was just yesterday that Governor DeSantis finally issued the stay-at-home order. So what do things look like in Florida right now? And what would you like people to be encouraging the governor's office and the state legislature in Florida to be doing to help people in Florida?
Yeah, it's been really incredibly frustrating to see Governor DeSantis bury his head in the sand in the midst of the most serious crisis that we've ever faced. And, he refused to shut down the beaches during spring break across the state. He refused to just show real leadership and communicate the seriousness of this situation. And the result is lives will be lost. There are, people dying, our elders, our frontline workers, family, and members of our community. And we also in Florida have the lowest unemployment rates in the country. There are millions of people who are losing their jobs. And Florida, we're in just have the distinct privilege of being in the bottom 4 in terms of our unemployment payment. Florida only gives you 275 days a week if you qualify for unemployment. That doesn't include the domestic workers and farm workers and restaurant workers and so many others that are paid under the table, that are paid in cash or are undocumented and won't qualify for benefits. And I think that's what we're really focused in on, is how do we help families weather this crisis, and how do we insist that our elected leaders do right by our families and our communities.
You were one of the co-founders of the National Domestic Workers Alliance, too, and I know that's a group of workers that right now is especially vulnerable in this kind of situation. What sorts of things would you like to make sure our listeners know and are thinking about domestic workers, and what we should all be doing to make sure that they're better protected right now?
Thank you for the question. I mean, I think this is the only way we're going to get through this is together, get through to the other side. And I think for us to really think about how we're looking out for our family, our friends, and, if you employ a house cleaner and you have the privilege of working from home and aren't going to be having someone come in to clean your house at this time, like, consider still continuing to pay that worker, understanding that so many of their clients may be canceling in this time and they might not be eligible for any benefits. There's, so many people that we rely on who, if they aren't getting paid, don't have food to put on the table. So I think, we have to really demand that our elected officials and the government do better, but there's also ways that we can step in the gap and provide mutual aid to one another. So whether it's, your nanny or your house cleaner or, a neighbor that is struggling at this time and could use a delivery of groceries. I think how we show up for each other in this moment matters. And I know the National Domestic Workers Alliance has a fund for domestic workers, so you can consider making a contribution there as well. And, there's so many ways that people can step up in this moment, volunteer, make calls, join an organization, make sure that you're a source of positivity and hope, or reach out for help when you need it. I mean, I really do think that we're at a crossroads, and we can either advance a solidarity economy and advance the vision for community and a country where no one is disposable and we look out for one another, or we could advance division and polarization and hate and leaving people out and leaving people behind. And I think this crisis, I think we're all learning a lot about ourselves and our families. And collectively, I think that there's a lot to learn about the choices that we're making and the way forward.
If people would like to help out New Florida Majority and the work that you do, either people who are in Florida or people who are outside of Florida, what are some ways that they can help advance the cause of your organization?
Yeah, so check us out, newfloridamajority.org, or check out this website, floridacoronaaction.org. We're a state with more elders than any other state in the country except Maine. And so we're really worried about the well-being of our seniors and frontline workers and everyone right now, really. So consider making a donation to support our work at New Florida Majority, or sign up to volunteer and phone bank with us, and just really appreciate the outpouring of support that we're receiving from around the country. And I mean, I think we learn from one another. So really welcome folks' ideas and contributions, and really, like, no contribution is too small. Like, everyone has a role to play, and take care of yourself, and let's take care of one another.
Is there anything else that you would like to make sure we talk about today?
I mean, I guess the only other thing that I think it's important to name is there's like so many people who are eligible to vote and not voting, or are registered to vote and not voting. So in Florida, there's over 4 million young people and people of color that are eligible to vote but aren't registered, or are registered to vote and aren't voting. And, we see that as our part of our work is to reach folks and talk to them and bring them in to this project of advancing democracy and advancing racial equity and social justice. And we stand on the shoulders of giants, and there's so many people who have come before us. And I think in this moment of political crisis, I know I'm taking a lot of guidance and comfort in the words of Audre Lorde and Ella Baker, the example of Dolores Huerta, and so many other like fierce freedom fighters. So we come from a long line of people that make a way out of no way. And I just try to remind myself that we're creative and we're resilient, and we look out for one another. And I'm surrounded by so many incredible women and young leaders who are committed to our community and are committed to advancing democracy and racial equity, and really invite all of you out there listening to join us.
I love that. And that is a nice, hopeful way to end. So, Andrea, thank you so much for speaking with me today and for all of the incredible work that you and New Florida Majority are doing.
Well, be well. Take care of yourself.
Yeah, you too.
Thank you for listening to Two Broads Talking Politics, part of the Dimcast Podcast Network. Our theme song is called Are You Listening? Off of the album Elephant Shaped Trees by the band Immunuri, and we're using it with permission of the band. Our logo and other original artwork is by Matthew Weflin and was created for use by this podcast. You can contact us at twobroadstalkingpolitics@gmail.com or on Twitter or Facebook at twobroadstalk. You can find all of our episodes at twobroadstalkingpolitics.com or anywhere podcasts are found.